Hey everyone, thank you for tuning into YouthLine Live. I'm Janae. If you're new to the show, YouthLine Live is a weekly television show that airs every Tuesday at 6 o'clock on Channel 76. So the topic for the show today is going to be civil engineering, and I'm here with Adam Butler, who is a local civil engineer. Our show is very interactive too. Our show is very interactive as well, so if you have any questions or comments throughout the show, feel free to call the number on the screen. On today's show, we're going to learn about some civil engineering and the steps to get there. But before we dive into that, we're just going to show a short B-roll.
What is engineering? Let's take a moment to think about your morning. The alarm on your phone goes off at 7:03. You drag yourself to the shower and blast yourself with perfectly warm water in an attempt to wake up. You smear your toothbrush with too much toothpaste and scrub yourself into a foamy mess of minty freshness. You're running late, so you skate downtown, weaving through the commuters, dart across the road, barely making the lights, and jump on the train just before the doors beep shut. There's a couple of stops to go, so you pull out your phone and play a few games of Angry Birds. Alarms, trains, traffic lights, video games, toothpaste, all these things were made possible by engineers. But what prompts an engineer to improve our world? Well, they solve problems. Problems are an engineer's inspiration, and maths and science are the creative tools they use to solve them. Problems like making your alarm go off at the right time, or making sure your toothpaste has just the right balance of chemicals to give you that perfect smile, or even making a game so addictive it's almost impossible to put down, if that really is a problem. Now let's head over to the airport and jump on an aeroplane. Aeroplanes. They're so easy to take for granted. But don't forget, you can fly! Before aeroplanes, flying was quite a bit more challenging. Every bit of your plane has been touched by engineers. A mechanical engineer designed the engine. A mechatronics engineer devised the controls. The fuel? Extracted by mining engineers and refined by chemical engineers. The navigation systems? Electrical and software engineers created those. Yep, a whole team of engineers. Now we've landed in Dubai, home of the Burj Khalifa. It's the world's tallest building at 829.8 metres high. It's also in one of the world's hottest environments, reaching up to 50 degrees in summer. One of the difficulties of building the Burj was trying to figure out how to set 45,000 cubic metres of reinforced concrete in such extreme weather. The solution? A clever method of pumping iced liquid concrete into the 55,000-ton steel frame during the night. The result? A building that's vertically over 800 metres high, rather than horizontally all over the ground. Now let's jump into our time machine and go back to Saturday. Saturday, March 1932. The Sydney Harbour Bridge is about to open. The bridge is a marvel of civil engineering, and a pretty cool place to set off some fireworks. Since 1815, people had been talking about building a bridge to connect the two sides of the harbour. The problem was that the harbour was so incredibly wide. How could a bridge span such a width and support its own weight? The solution? The Romans! Well, actually it was an idea they came up with. The arched bridge works by transferring the weight into horizontal forces and bracing them at the ends of the arch. But what about the future? What problems will engineers solve next? Will we finally have affordable solar power? Or robots that can perform life-saving surgery?
So obviously there are many different types of engineers who do many different types of fascinating things. So Adam, what inspired you to become an engineer?
Sure. So I didn't look at it as becoming an engineer initially. I think I just naturally fell into the role. I loved playing with Legos as a little kid, and as I got older, that kind of translated into playing SimCity. I'm not sure if that's still a game these days, but it was pretty big when I was younger. And in that game, you basically build a city, so you're building a civilization, which was very interesting. And so if you think of civilization, the word civil is in there, and that's a civil engineer. So civil engineering, which we can dive into more, that video, the intro video, touched on it pretty well. The Burj Khalifa, the bridge in Sydney, those are all examples of civil engineering projects. And so I decided to move into that in college. I was split between being a meteorologist or a civil engineer, and at some point I realized civil engineers are a little more in demand probably, so I did that in college, loved the courses, and took some internships in college. Every summer I did an internship, and that kind of reaffirmed my interest in the field. And then now that I'm older and I've been working in it for over 8 years, I can certainly say I enjoy it, and now I think I appreciate the difference in all the engineering. So I think we can talk about that tonight: electrical, mechanical, etc. And that video introduced a little bit there.
Great. So there's definitely some differences there. And what are some of your everyday duties? Like, what's it like waking up in the morning, going to work, and being a civil engineer?
Sure. So we'll have to dive into the differences with some of the engineerings a little bit. But I'm an environmental engineer specifically. So within civil engineering, you can be an environmental, transportation, geotechnical, or structural engineer, which those four areas really make up the majority of it. And so within environmental engineering, every day I'm working on water and wastewater systems that we as society depend upon. And so that can be a pipeline, a treatment plant. And I have a few examples here that we can talk about and do a little show and tell on. But basically, any day I'm dealing with a client, which would be a town or city or a water district, who has an issue. We need to upgrade this pipeline, or we need to build a new pipeline here, or we need to upgrade our treatment plant. So we inspect that, figure out what we have to do, and then implement those fixes.
Oh, okay, so it seems like you have a little bit of, you have something to do with, like, floods and how to handle those and, like, what happens with the city. So, like, recently we've been seeing a lot of, flood watches and everything.
Sure. In part, there's kind of three different areas of water: wastewater, drinking water, and stormwater. Okay. And this might not mean much to a high school student, but we can go into more detail. But stormwater engineering deals a lot with flooding, how to make sure the streets are draining, how to make sure there's not water spilling into a building, things like that.
Okay, so actually, speaking of high school students, like, what steps would you say to take in order to become a civil engineer? Are there any extracurriculars they could take, majors in college? What are some tips you have for people wanting to pursue the same career?
Sure. Well, major in college, that's an easy one. It's civil engineering is really the one you want to stick with. There are professionals in civil engineering who have come from different backgrounds, whether it's geology or chemical engineering, and then they move more into the treatment side of things. So there are opportunities to get into it, but usually they're in a science or engineering related field. If you know you want to do civil engineering specifically, you can go right into civil engineering. The other thing is you can go into general engineering with a lot of colleges, is my understanding, and then you can decide if you want to focus more on mechanical, chemical, electrical, or what it might, or whichever specific engineering you might be interested in. So with that said, if you want to know how to explore the option more, you can just play with any toys that are out there, like Legos or SimCity, I said, specifically for civil engineering. Or if you have an interest in mechanical, electrical, just start taking things apart, like your clock or your bike, and figuring out how it works.
Okay, and so it looks like we have a call come in. We're going to answer that.
We need an engineer.
We all. We always welcome calls, so feel free to also call in any time that you're feeling welcome. Hi, you're here with YouthLine and Adam Butler.
Hi, I have a question.
Okay.
Do you guys, did you take any programs in college to help you in the engineering world to Adam?
I'm sorry, ask the question again?
Did you take any programs in college to help you in the engineering world?
What do you mean by programs exactly?
Like, I don't know, any other activities outside of college?
Sure. So I had, as I mentioned, internships every summer, and that kind of helped me reaffirm my interest in the career field, but it also helped teach me a lot. So I got to work on real world projects and learn more in that, but I also got to utilize what I was learning already in college, and that's enjoyable. It's fun to be able to work on real projects that in the civil engineering world people were depending on and were critical to society. So friends of mine who were in mechanical or electrical engineering got to work on similar problems, but in those engineering fields it's more working on an alarm clock or a car or something along those lines.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Actually, Adam, can you show us some of the visuals that you had?
Sure. So as a civil engineer, I mentioned we work on, and me specifically, an environmental engineer, we work on a lot of water, wastewater infrastructure. So here I have a set of plans that we worked on recently for a wastewater treatment plant, and it might be difficult to see at this angle, but it's probably 100-something pages, and maybe you can help me hold it up there. But these just include details of every component. It looks like these here are electrical and instrumentation drawings, so an electrical engineer would work on this. And so actually, while we're talking about this, this demonstrates that usually on any project, a number of engineers will work on it. So as I mentioned, an electrical engineer worked on these sheets. Can I keep flipping here? Yeah. I think this next page here, it looks like a structural engineer might have worked on. Sorry about that. This is a clarifier in a treatment plant, and so you can see the truss system here. That requires a structural engineer, excuse me. Mm-hmm. And then this here I just printed out today. It's just a diagram of the California water system. So a lot of water in Northern California comes down to Southern California, LA region, and there's civil engineers involved in the planning of that, the systems that help move that water from Northern California down to Southern California, whether it's the dams, pipelines, treatment plants, pumping stations. There's a number of components in there that a whole team of engineers would work on, and so I'm always impressed by how complex of a system it is to get water down from Northern California to Southern California. There we go. And so that's interesting to me. Systems like this is what interests me, but for you, example, Janae, you might be more interested in what makes my clock tick, and that would be more of a electrical or maybe even a mechanical engineer if you're working on gears.
I'm actually very impressed with the fact that you have such a, huge book full of maps and things. Like most people, wouldn't really find that too interesting, but an engineer definitely would have those interests. And so, what do you think is the toughest part of your job, or like the most difficult thing day to day, maybe?
That's a tough one. I know I looked at this earlier and I couldn't come up with a great answer for that one, because I think if you enjoy your everyday work, you don't have many challenges or difficulties in it. Sometimes people can complain about a bad customer or a difficult boss, but in the jobs I've had, and I've worked for a couple different companies, I've never really run into that situation. And so I think it's similar in different engineerings. It's usually not you usually don't hear about too many complaints that you might in other jobs. And so, not to boast up engineering, but it's usually a very enjoyable workplace where people are proud of the work they do. They're happy. They feel a sense of accomplishment. And I can't really say there's too many negatives about it.
I think your job is really important. I think it's underrated. And I, for example, didn't know much about civil engineering, but now that you've really shed light on it, I'm very thankful for everything you do. So, what do you think is the most enjoyable part? Flip to that.
Sure. I think there's a number of enjoyable parts. I mean, knowing every day that the work I do is benefiting society in some way, whether it's making sure that there's clean drinking water or that there's enough pressure in the water pipe to make sure you have a shower that is pouring enough water on you, or if I go for a run along Ocean Beach here in San Francisco, I'm not smelling sewage in the ocean because the processes we've worked on have helped clean that up. So again, that's very specific to environmental engineering, but I think any civil engineer can have that same sense of pride, knowing that a building standing up or the road is transporting people, or that the foundation of a building is keeping that standing up. And so similar with mechanical engineering and electrical, with the electrical supply, a lot of these things impact everything we depend on every day. And so I think that gives you a sense of pride. Pride's not a great thing to have, but it gives you a good sense of accomplishment at the end of the day. One other thing I think I would say, that for me at least, it's always enjoyable to have a set of plans like this finished at the end of the day, because there's a lot of work that goes into it, and it's good to see that finished product.
So we're going to take another call. Hi, you're here with YouthLine and Adam Butler.
Hi, this is a question for Adam. How many projects do you work on in a year?
In a year, that can vary. Usually, most engineers like myself typically have a handful of big projects and then a few more smaller projects. And so those big projects might take several months or years, which you work on long term, and that takes up a big portion of your time. And then those smaller projects kind of help fill in the gaps of your workload. So in a year, I'd say on average maybe 10 projects. 4 of those would be big, 6 would be small. Again, these are just averages, but that probably is about right.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So how long have you been doing your job?
A little over 8 years now.
Okay, and what are you most proud to have achieved, if there is anything?
Yeah, again, I can't think of one particular thing other than after working on a project for a long time, there's so many moving pieces and so many small components that go into it that it's good to see a set of plans like this at the end of the day, which you design, you put all that work and research into, and then you get to see it built. You see it get to go into construction. So that's when you break out the hard hat and you might get to visit a project site and you see the excavators and all the dirt moving around. But then the other thing that you might feel a sense of pride about is knowing that your work is helping society every day, like I said.
Okay, well, touching back onto college, some people often worry about expenses, maybe which college they're going to. Is there one college that's better than the other, or is there a type, a specific type?
That's a good question. I think there are certainly colleges and universities that stand out from others, particularly in engineering. But that's not to say that other schools, state schools for example, aren't good either. I went to the University of Massachusetts Amherst back in New England, where I'm from, and that's one of the best engineering programs in the Northeast. It typically might be second rated to a place like MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, but you might say the same for UC Berkeley and Stanford here. Both are very well respected, and that doesn't set the rest of your career. It'll definitely help if you go to a great school. It'll help you get a better first job, but beyond that, the more effort you put into your internships, the more hard work you show at your job, you can accelerate your career, and people will look at that more than the name of the school you went to at a certain point.
Okay. And so how soon did you find your first job? Let's just say after you get your degree, what's next? What's after that?
Well, again, internships, I mentioned internships, those are important to have, so that can usually lead to a job for yourself. Once you get that first job, that tends to set where your career is going. And so for me, I got into water and wastewater engineering in my first job, and I had done some internships in that area already, so I enjoyed it. But I've been in that ever since, and I'm not sure if that's because of the first job I had or if it's just a natural fit for me. I do enjoy it, and so I'm still there.
Okay, interesting. And so I know you wanted to touch on the other types of engineering, if you wanted to explain to us, chemical engineers, maybe.
Sure. So I think that intro video touched on a few of them. Chemical engineers might work on toothpaste, for example, like that intro video showed. Typically, I think most chemical engineers are working in the petroleum space. They might be working on fuel cells, clean energy. That's kind of the hot topic these days. And electrical engineers would be working on any electrical component. So the lights in this room, the cameras, anything that runs on electricity, which is most things these days, has had an electrical engineer involved at some point in the design of that product. A mechanical engineer works on machines and robots, and so a car would be a good example. An elevator in a building would be another example, something that a mechanical engineer might look at. And the other big one that's around here in the Silicon Valley area would be software engineering. Now, software engineering is a bit of an anomaly compared to all the other engineering because you don't always need a 4-year degree to get into that, and you can kind of self-teach yourself a lot of those skills. So again, software engineering it's a newer career field, and I think it's still evolving a bit. There's not as much regulation like civil engineering has with professional engineering registration. We might see that come to light eventually, but yeah, software engineering might be the most interesting and one that youth are most familiar with these days.
Okay. And are there any traits you think a specific person should, have to be successful in this field of work? I know that you said, oh, we have another call. Let's go come back to it. Hi, you're here with YouthLine and Adam Butler.
Yeah, hello?
Hello?
Yeah, I'm here to talk about civil engineering.
Okay.
And I have a question if you want.
I'm sorry, we can't really hear you. Could you speak a little clearer?
Yeah, I got some questions on, if you don't mind asking them, on civil engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, like, what kind of a person makes a good civil engineer?
Well, I think with any engineering, you have to look at math and science. All engineering involves the application of those principles to solve real-world problems. I think that's the cliche definition from Wikipedia probably, but that's what it really is. So you have to have those good...
Okay, I'm so sorry to cut you off. Thank you. Today you learned about civil engineering and about some different careers. Thank you for being here. I'm Janae.
And Adam.
And bye.